Hello, everyone that has entered this wonderful session with us today. Welcome to RamFam Weekend. This is day 2. My name is Abby Dempster, and I'm one of the graduate assistants supporting the Office of Parent and Family Relations today. We're really excited today. We have an awesome guest for the Ancestry DNA mock class. Dr. Anita Foman is here. She is a professor in the Department of Communication and Media. Dr. Foman is a Westchester celebrity. She is the founder and primary investigator of the DNA Discussion Project, and her work has been featured on NPR, PBS, and in countless academic journals. So we hope you enjoy this session. So Dr. Foman, go ahead and take it away. We're really excited.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to everybody for being here and being part of this. And this project started in 2006 on campus. So I'm going to be sharing my screen with you to talk with you. Let me get my screen shared here. And I assume everybody can see that. Can you see that all right, then Abigail?
Yep, looks great.
Okay. And so I want to start by talking to you about how the project started. I want to hear a little bit from you, and I want to talk about our goals in this project and how we've been crossing both lines of race and identity and academic fields. And if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And also, you will be asked to give a little bit of feedback as we go. So let me tell you how this got started. And I don't know if any of you have students or yourself background in science. As you heard, I'm in communication and media. And so I had always liked science, but I went into communication. But I was interested in the Human Genome Project, which was basically trying to determine our entire genome and to find out what the recipe was for a human being. And as early as back in the 90s, magazines like Discover magazines were talking about how all human beings came from sub-Saharan Africa and how the theories of identity were starting to change because of new scientific information. And what started to happen is this Human Genome Project started to expand, and they said that we can look at your genes and tell you what your ethnic background is. And I thought that's really interesting. And it sort of brought together two interests of mine, science and communication, because a lot of the work that I had done was on how people from different backgrounds talk to one another. So I don't know if we have a bunch of people here yet, because people may be filing in. Should I wait on doing a poll?
Yeah, maybe if you can, maybe just push it a little bit back if that works for your presentation.
That's totally fine.
Okay,
And
great.
so I wanted to do this to improve the dialogue among people. And so I don't know how many of you have ever taken an Ancestry DNA test, but it requires a simple saliva sample. And the interesting thing is that people would think, oh, you have to take blood. And in the past, to get DNA profile from somebody, they did take blood. But now you give a simple spit sample, and you can see the young man spitting. And I have seen more people spit into test tubes than I could ever tell you. When we started out the project, the first time I started to understand that you could use this DNA to find somebody's background, I had to find a lab who was able to do this work. One kit cost $450. Now you can get a special and it's $69. I think the lowest price I've gotten on really a high quality DNA test was $50. So that's how much the price has come down. And so we started out with 3 people that we tested from 3 different backgrounds. And the findings that we got were really generic, really very general. And now they're so sophisticated. We've now tested over 3,000 people. And the protocol that we use is always the same. We ask people what they know about their backgrounds. And think about the stories in your family. The first thing that we do is send people home to talk to their families about what's in their background. And so we ask people what's in their background, talk to Nana, talk to Pop-Up, talk to your parents, talk to relatives, and then tell us what that narrative is. And then we Ancestry DNA test people, and then we have a discussion about it. And that protocol has really been the protocol since day one and right into today, when, as I said, we've tested more than 3,000 people, and also have done much more sophisticated statistical analysis. At the beginning, it was all, looking at stories and what themes came up, but now we've got all kinds of statistical analysis that we do. Let me just say one thing about what we have found, and then I want to talk about how they actually do these tests. We have found that even though people find sometimes surprises in their background, they don't change their identity. Even if they find something that's wildly unexpected, they sort of go along with what they've always thought. We have people all the time who find out they, identified as Italian and they have African in their background or Middle Eastern in their background. We find out African Americans who have very little African in their background, and on and on and on. And people do not change their identities based on the DNA tests. And so one of the final points that we came to is that identity really isn't held in your genes. We tend to think that it's genetic, and it is to some extent, but our identities are not just tied to our genes, they're tied to our culture and our life experience. But one of the questions that I get asked often is, how do they do it? What is it about? And so what they're actually doing in these genetic tests is looking at what are called SNPs in your genes. And what your genes do is they give messages about how a certain gene should be expressed. And so there are 3 genes that these companies use thousands and thousands and thousands of genes to identify what your backgrounds are. They're very sophisticated. But in order to give an example, I wanted to talk about 3 particular genes. And one is called EDAR, and one is the dark gene, and one is the HERC2. So I thought I'd just mention those for interest. EDAR is what is often associated with Asian profile, and as well as Native American profile. And so sometimes in these tests, you'll test somebody who's Asian and they'll come up as Native American. Somebody will be Chinese and they get part Native American, and they're like, I've never even been to the United States. But they share that gene because of the migration pattern. And that EDAR gene, GG type, is that straight, thick hair, and also a certain facial profile and other things. So here's one gene that expresses in that. There's a second gene called the dark gene, which I don't know if they did this on purpose. It's associated with African Americans, and it is related to malaria resistance. And so that is one profile. And just by the way, I then compared my genes to those. So in terms of the hair type, my hair type was totally different. I do not have GG hair type. The dark gene, C is related to African, people with African background, and A is more related to European. I have one of each because in my profile, I have about 80% African and about 20% European. And the last one, the HERC2, if anybody has blue eyes, the GG type is blue eyes, and it's associated with, Europeans. Interesting thing about this is that gene mutation is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Before that, everybody on Earth had brown eyes, and they think only one person had that mutation. So anybody who has blue eyes is very likely to trace back to this one person. He must have been extremely popular. So that's, everybody relates back to him. And by the way, I have one G and one, I forget what the other allele is, but I have one of each. And of course, brown eyes is dominant, so my eyes are brown. I also wanted to talk about some of the ways that so you can see there that we're relating to science. And so we take students who never had any interest in science, and we start talking about science, and they're talking about genes and HERC2 and all of that. The other direction that we go is to talk to people about art and how does that relate. And the gentleman that you see there calls himself Brooklyn McTavish. His birth name was Patrick Ibezube, and he is a photographer. And he takes people's genetic profiles, you get it done, and it gives you different percentages of different things in your background. And so he does research where he finds your different backgrounds and finds different costumes. I hate to use the word costumes because they were really just the way people dress. And he does a whole photographic shoot. So you can see there that I did it with him, and 3 of my backgrounds were 2 West African, and there's Ghana, sort of Nigeria, Ghana there, and the second one is Bantu, I think, and then Scottish. And so I did those 3, and you do a whole photo shoot. It's quite amazing. The young woman of Asian background, or medium young woman of Asian background, is my research partner, Bessie Lee Lawton, who did 3 of her backgrounds, I think Filipino, Chinese, I forget what the third one was. And then he did the photographic shoot. The guy in the middle there did Knights Templar in his background, and he also found some Irish pirate in his background. So that was a wonderful one that he did. And the woman at the bottom is Latina, and she found, not surprisingly, that she had several indigenous people in her background. And so this is a way of getting people to look at different things in their background that are surprising or catch them off guard that they had not expected. Let me just mention that people sometimes are surprised by their backgrounds, not because it's something, you know, somebody had an affair or whatever, but the migration patterns of people really are often complex. We tested somebody who said that she was Vietnamese, and we tested her and it was all Chinese. And then she talked to her parents and they said, oh yes, we're Chinese, but during some social upheaval, everybody transferred to Vietnam. And so that was a story her family got to share. So so that is just fascinating. And again, it brings the genetics and the art and, you know, social science together. And anybody who has a question, did anybody pop a question in the chat there? Okay, if you want to ask a question, or I can talk about this all day. So some of the places that this has been covered, let me just talk a little bit about that. We've been on NPR talking about some of our research. In November, there's going to be a NOVA about students on campus who were tested. And I'm also in the process of doing what's called a GREAT course. It's a 12-part course on different elements, different things that you can find out from doing your DNA. So I want to get out of this. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And first of all, see if you have any questions that you would like to ask. And, or as I said, or I can just chat away. Okay. So first of all, when we ask people, one of the questions that we've asked people, both in a scientific way and in general, in a non-scientific way, is how many of you think that you have secrets or gaps in your family? And when we ask in scientific research, about 60% of people say that they have secrets and gaps in their family. When we ask in a non-scientific poll, 80 to 90% of people say that they have secrets and gaps in their family. So people are not surprised that they have secrets and gaps in their own families. Oh, somebody said, what are the higher quality tests? We use Ancestry DNA, and the only reason, I shouldn't say the only reason, it is a high quality test. We started using them because of the way that they present the findings. They give a pie chart with the breakdown. Now, all of them basically give that, because we've used many, many tests over the years. And now everybody gives you the pie chart with the percentages. Let me just respond on the different types of tests. because sometimes different labs will offer different things. For example, Ancestry DNA will not give you a mitochondrial DNA, and I'll tell you what that is in a second, or the X DNA, and they give you a third kind. Sometimes people want to find out their mitochondrial DNA, and that's their mother's line. So it's going to be exactly the same from me to my mother, my daughter, and that maternal line. That's the mtDNA, and certain labs do it. It's very narrow, and it will take you back to your deep ancestry. And on my mother's side, it goes back to sub-Saharan Africa. On my dad's side, it goes back to Eurasia. And we think that that has to do with slavery, and that the male side was European, and my mom's side goes back to African. But what is used for the lab that we want are the autosomal tests, which bring from both sides, and people tend to like that. But Ancestry DNA, 23andMe is high quality. Family DNA has changed a little bit. They used to be more liberal in letting law enforcement look at your profiles. Ancestry DNA and 23andMe fight that. And I think there was only one instance where Ancestry DNA was sort of forced to give information, and they found a murderer, but they did harass another relative who wasn't the person before because their DNA was similar. But yeah, so privacy, read the privacy statements. Do you find people who are looking for lost realities and lost relatives? I assume as part of that. Absolutely. And people who aren't even looking for them find them. We do tell people, I spend a lot of time, you must be over 18 to participate. Mostly it's students who participate in the project, but sometimes we have community projects. You have to be over 18, and we talk about the things that you can find. Sometimes people are specifically looking for lost relatives. For example, we were doing a project, and actually the manager of the project asked if he could take a test himself. He's 40, and he had been adopted. He had been in the foster care system and finally been adopted, but he was older when he was adopted. So his mother had died when he was young, and he wanted to find his dad. So he took the test. He's 40 years old. He goes on, he gets the test after 6 weeks. His father's first and last name, totally right there. He'd never heard of this person. So after 40 years of looking, he found his dad, and he did reach out. The site was dormant. The other person has to also have taken the test. So he went on, and the site was dormant. The person had not been back on. So he goes on Facebook, and the same thing had happened. It was dormant, but he tracked down a relative who was a cousin of the person, and the cousin of the person reached out to him. He reached out to, and they sent him some questions about his mother and where he was from and all of that. And he sent back the information and sent back his phone number, and he got a phone call, and the guy said, "The word on the street is you're looking for me, son." And his father did not even know that he existed. So they sent me a picture of them together, smiling ear to ear. And now this guy who didn't have a family has a family. So that is one that was, really a positive one. But people find cousins, people find all kinds of folks. Sometimes, as I said, sometimes it's like, surprise, you're my relative. So absolutely. And I don't know if anybody here has taken a DNA test. So, I don't know if that is an experience that you've had. The other thing, just in terms of people's backgrounds, is that people often find that they had backgrounds that weren't expected. And it's interesting how that varies. I found this with Latinos, who could be any kind of background. They might have a African background, European background, Middle Eastern. And so some groups are much more of a mix. African Americans tend to be much more of a mix. And people who identify as white or European will often have a lot of different European groups, but also sometimes they have African, they have Asian, that really surprises them. And we have found that African Americans and Latinos are less surprised when they find out that they have something unusual. People who are Asian, it's been a smaller test population, but we've had a bunch, are also very surprised if they have other things in their backgrounds. But America is identified as an admixed population anyway, like Americans are all mixed together and find that about their backgrounds anyway. The other questions that people might have. So I'll just comment on a couple of other things, and then you can let me know if there's anything else that you want to know. We found that if people are going to take an ancestry DNA test, that there are probably some things that they want to do and keep in mind. And the first thing is to tell your relatives, because when we do this in class, the very first thing that we tell people to do is go talk to your relatives. Don't catch somebody off guard. And sometimes stories have popped out that people have been surprised about. And a lot of times it's really an opportunity to ask people to have a conversation with your family that you hadn't had before. So people find out, about different relatives and about stories that were in the family. So we first tell people, go talk to your family members, find out what's in your background, see if there are any surprises. And occasionally we've had people who weren't going to take it, who decide to take it. And most students in my classes do, though we never require it. And sometimes people who were going to take it decide that they're not going to take it based on those conversations. But as I said, most people go ahead and take it. So we tell people to first have those conversations. The second thing, especially if you don't have a chance to talk to your family, is to look in the mirror. Because we have had people be very surprised at something in their background, and then other people look at them and they say, why does that surprise you? I'm looking at you, I see that. Somebody says here, did the test tell you anything about medical predispositions? That is a fabulous question. The answer to that is yes, and even more so in the future. I don't know if anybody has taken 23, and I think Abigail said that she'd actually done the 23andMe test. And 23andMe started out by giving you various predispositions. And because of this work that we're doing, I used my daughter as the guinea pig for all of them. We've taken so many of the tests that are out there on the market. And when she first took it, we've been doing this work since these companies before they existed. And so when they first came out, they were giving you some serious information. She had to check twice, she was over 18, and that she really wanted to know whether she had the BRCA1 gene. And there were other Hodgkin's disease, there were other very serious conditions. And then the FDA said that they had to cease and desist giving this information because some of it was not as accurate as it should be, and they were giving out medical information. But they're back, and now they give things that are more benign. Are you likely to be addicted to coffee? Yes, and things along those lines. But right now, drug companies are very involved with this DNA. As a matter of fact, several of these companies, 23andMe in particular, but several of these DNA companies have relationships with pharmaceuticals exactly to look for that. And not to push our book, but we have a book that's coming out in November, and we talk about some of the things that drug companies are looking for. And I don't know if anybody here has read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, where they actually took her genes and used them for research of every kind and never paid her for that. That's becoming sort of an issue because drug companies are scanning. These are millions and millions of DNA samples, and they are looking at that. Yes, the question is about bipolar disorder. A lot of these are psychological conditions: depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, and you may even have seen ads so far on TV that will say, if you have depression and one drug has not worked for you, take, I think it's psychotropic, I'm probably saying it wrong, but it's close to that, to take this DNA test to determine which drug is best for you. That is absolutely one of the things that they're doing. The FDA just actually posted, because there's so much of this out on the market, whether it's diets or cancer or whatever, there's so much of this that the FDA actually posted a list of which genes and gene interactions they thought really were accurate when people attempted to match a drug to their genetic type. So this is still in its infancy. It's still in its infancy, but yes, that's the way it's going. And we have a geneticist on campus, and then her husband is also a geneticist and works with pharmaceuticals. And he's saying that in the future, two things are going to be true. Number one, you'll probably be able to get your full genetic profile for a couple $100s. And number two, you will probably walk into the doctor's office with your full genetic profile, and they will be attempting to match your treatment to your genetic profile. And this is a direct extension of what people are getting in when they take these DNA. It's the same DNA. It's the same DNA. One of the concerns that people sometimes have is that people look at their genes and then assume that genes are everything. But as much as genes, and I don't know if you've heard the word epigenetics, as much as genes is the environment, because we always know that somebody could have a predisposition for depression, but they grow up in an environment and it never fully, displays itself because they may be in a low stress environment or whatever. We all know somebody may have a predisposition for a certain kind of cancer, but they may never get it. So genes are not the total ball of wax, but genes are going to be part of it. And because we have this ability to look at genes, that is going to be more and more and more and more important in the future. We use the Ancestry DNA, we keep thinking about the possibility of having our own students run the DNA. That is crazy and expensive for a number of reasons. That I shouldn't use the expression crazy. That has not happened for a number of reasons. And I don't know that it will, just because it's so much easier to use a lab. If you've used the Ancestry.com, that's the one we use, and you would have to get your own other test. We have started to play with looking at some of the other kits that look at, and to the person who was asking about psychological conditions, to the person who was asking about that, the 4 researchers in this project, we're all going to do one of the tests that help identify which medications would be better for certain psychological conditions. And then COVID hit, and the dean's office asked people to hold off on research that required money because they wanted to save, as much funds as possible. So we have not completed that project, but one of our interests is definitely to learn more about that and to share that information. So to the question about Ancestry.com, right now, that's the only kit that we are using. In the future, that may expand, but at this point, not so much. And again, there are some really targeted. If you're on a diet, you have seen that people who are on a diet can take a DNA test to tell you what's more likely to trip you up. And the cancer, you've seen ads on TV for cancer drugs that say, before you get treatment for this kind of cancer, take this DNA test because it will tell you which treatments are likely to be best. The fascinating thing for me about this project is, again, as I said, I didn't major in science. I always liked science, but I did not major in science. And what I love about it is that this crosses every field. Who would have thought that I would have had the opportunity to be drilling down into specific genes? And there's going to be more of that. And this conversation is not just for scientists. This is not just for scientists. Every one of us is going to be more in charge of what happens to us based on our genes. And I mentioned epigenetics. So let me just comment on that again, I'm not a scientist, but it's really important that we have genes, but also our environment is an important factor, because epigenetics are sort of above the genes, the epigenome, and can cause orientation to come out or not. So that if you exercise and eat well, it's going to impact, even if you have a gene that tends to be toward, high cholesterol or whatever else it might be, you may be able to manage some of that by by your lifestyle. And there are some genes, some drugs now that are targeted to the epigenome, not just the genes directly. But this is the future. This is the future. And as I said, I just sort of tripped over this, and it came together in such a great way that this is the conversation that just can take so many directions and relate to so many people in so many different ways. And let me just say, because of the whole situation with COVID, everything is sort of on hold. I'm driving around with about 30 DNA kits in the back of my car that we were going to use this semester. But the world will come back, and or we'll think of other ways to approach this. But we want to be really careful, and we want to be really respectful of what's going on in society right now. So that's where we are with this. And let me see if there's another question. It says, I'm sorry, I'm reading that question. Oh, somebody says if they are in the project, would they take another test? You would only take another test if you had not done Ancestry DNA, because you would just get the same test. But let me say this, labs update the information often, and that used to flip people out, because you take the test and people would think these results are like finite. If you learn anything from doing these tests, it is that science is a human endeavor. And so they had certain findings at the beginning. As they get larger data sets and larger human pools, they update the information. So even if you took an Ancestry DNA test, you keep checking back online, because they will update. I was just online looking at some tests, because I did do a project with the honor students this semester, and I was looking to see if the results are in, and they said, look, in the next week, we're going to update results again. So if you have something in Ancestry, they are going to be updating the results. So you're going to get new results right there at the same website, and for free. So good. Any other questions that people have? Right. I hope you found this interesting and worth your time. And again, if there are folks who are interested in participating, we're not going to do anything else this semester, and then we have winter term. But if you're interested, reach out, and in the spring, who knows what the world will look like. But as I said, even if we're not doing things the same way, this will give us a chance to sort of recalibrate and figure out the best way to approach that in the future. So anything from Lexi or Abigail, and I will call it a day for you then. Thank you to the person who says that they enjoyed the conversation. And I'm right on campus. Well, I'm not on campus, but anybody who wants to reach out and email, you certainly know how to get in touch with me. So we'll call that